Welcome to World Knowledge Channel. Oil is one of the most important resources in the world, playing a key role in meeting global energy demand. In the international market, some countries are famous for exploiting and exports oil in a large way, thereby contributing to the global economic structure. Below is a list of the world's top 11 countries in oil export, based on production output and supply capacity. Stable level for many years. Let's find out which country it is through this video. 1. That is America. As we can see, America is the world's largest economy. America is also the largest oil producer. U.S. crude oil output exceeded Saudi Arabia's output in 2018 by more than 2 decades and has maintained the lead since then. Crude oil is produced in 32 U.S. states and in coastal waters. However, nearly 71% of total U.S. crude oil production comes from 5 states: Texas, North Dakota, New Mexico, Oklahoma and Colorado. The U.S. oil and natural gas industry supports 10.3 million jobs in the country and contributes nearly 8% of gross domestic product, GDP. In 2018, the U.S. surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest crude oil producer, despite the fact that some countries have larger total oil reserves. The main oil producers in the United States are Texas, federally owned offshore facilities, New Mexico and North Dakota. Alaska, Colorado, Wyoming and California are also major contributors. In addition to being the world's leading oil producer, the U.S. is also the world's largest oil consumer. As a result, the United States imports more oil from a number of oil-producing countries. U.S. Energy Information Administration (EIA) data indicates that total petroleum production in the U.S. averaged about 18.87 million barrels per day, while consumption averaged about 19.78 million barrels per day in 2021. The difference between consumption and production is due to imports. The top 5 countries with total U.S. petroleum imports in 2021 are Canada, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Colombia. Export output: 11,567,000 barrels per day. 2. Nigeria. Nigeria is the most populous country in OPEC and the largest oil producer and exporter in Africa. Data from OPEC shows that Nigeria exported over 1.7 million barrels of oil per day in 2016, slightly more than Angola's exports. 3. Saudi Arabia, officially the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has 17% of the world's proven crude oil reserves, the second largest in the world. Saudi Arabia is a founding member of OPEC and contributes 22.4% of the current market share. It joined the World Trade Organization in 2005 to access global markets, create jobs and encourage foreign investment. About 50% of Saudi Arabia's GDP and 70% of its export earnings are driven by the oil and gas sector. The country is the world's largest oil exporter and the de facto leader of the OPEC group. It is also home to the Gawa oil field, in the east of the country, which is the world's largest conventional oil field and accounts for a large proportion of Saudi Arabia's crude oil output. In 2020, Saudi Arabia reduced production to rebalance the global oil market according to OPEC's decision. In 2018, 2019 and 2020, the country produced 12.11, 11.47 and 10.85 million barrels per day of petroleum and other liquids. According to the EIA, Saudi Arabia has increased production since February 2021 and by October it was estimated to reach 9.8 million barrels per day. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, Saudi Arabia's total oil production was 12 million barrels per day in January 2022. Saudi Arabia-based Aramco is one of the most valuable companies in the world. Export output: 10,225,000 barrels per day. 4. It's Venezuela, my friend. Venezuela is a founding member of OPEC, which currently has 14 members. In 2016, Venezuela exported 1.9 million barrels of oil per day. Possessing the world's largest oil reserves, Venezuela is currently engulfed in a comprehensive economic, political, social crisis. Not only has it made mistakes in economic management for many years, Venezuela has also encountered difficulties when oil prices have dropped sharply in recent years. Petroleum accounts for approximately 95% of the total export turnover of this South American country. 5. China is one of the largest producers and consumers of energy. China was the only major economy that did not contract in 2020, nor did it see any decline in oil production. It remained unchanged at 4.86 million barrels per day. Production in 2021 was reported at 4.99 million barrels per day, while consumption was 15.27 million barrels per day. According to the EIA, China's oil production comes from legacy fields that require expensive advanced oil recovery techniques to maintain production. Daqing Oil Province, located in the Songliao Plain in northeast China, is the largest oil production area in China. In recent years, China and Russia have strengthened their commercial ties in the oil and gas sector. In early February 2022, PJSC Rosneft Oil Company and China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, signed an agreement in which Rosneft will supply 100 million tons of oil to China through Kazakhstan for 10 years. Previously in January 2022, CNOOC Limited's production target was set at 600 to 610 mmboe, million barrels of oil equivalent. The country is also the world's second largest oil consumer after the United States, and imports most of its crude oil from abroad, largely from Saudi Arabia and Russia. Export output, 3,969,000 barrels per day. 6. Brazil is the only Latin American country on this list and accounted for about 3% of global production in 2019 with output of about 2.9 million barrel per day. The country ended its state monopoly over the exploration and production (E&P) industry in 1995, and oil reserves and production rates have been shown to have increased steadily since then. State-backed company Petrobras remains active in Brazil's domestic oil industry. The majority of Brazil's oil production is concentrated on pre-saline projects in the Santos and Campos basins, located in the South Rio de Janeiro in the South Atlantic Ocean. Brazil has proven oil reserves of 12.8 billion barrels, approximately 0.8% of global supply. Crude and refined oil accounted for nearly 9% of Brazil's total exports of $219 billion in 2017. And the majority was sold to China and the United States, according to MIT Media Lab's The Observatory of Economic Complexity. Oil production in Brazil has increased 27.5% over the past half-decade, even as production in Central and South America decreased by 2.6%. Export output, 2,852,000 barrels per day. 7. Angola. Angola exported 1.7 million barrels of oil per day in 2016, according to OPEC data. Oil exploitation and supporting industries account for about 45% of Angola's gross domestic product, GDP, and 95% of the African country's exports. Since joining OPEC in 2007, Angola has become the sixth largest oil exporter in the bloc. Divided equally between pipeline and sea routes. Most Russian exports are sent to China, as well as key European markets including the Netherlands and Germany. In the context of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the United States banned imports of Russian crude oil and some petroleum products, liquefied natural gas and coal. In 2021, the U.S. imported nearly 700,000 barrels of crude oil and refined petroleum products from Russia every day. The country's oil output is mainly controlled by domestic companies such as Rosneft, Lukoil, Gazprom and Tatneft. Oil is an indispensable part of the Russian economy. Russia is also home to the world's largest natural gas reserves, and, along with the United States, dominates global production of this resource. Export output, 11,300,000 barrels per day. 8. It's Kuwait. According to OPEC, Kuwait exported more than 2.1 million barrels of oil per day in 2016. The oil and gas industry contributed 60% of GDP and accounted for 95% of Kuwait's exports. The country's economy has become less dependent on oil than before, although oil and gas production still accounts for about 30% of GDP. Oil exports, many of which go to Japan, account for around 25% of the UAE's gross domestic product, GDP, and the country has been a member of OPEC since 1967. 9. And the United Arab Emirates, a small country roughly the size of South Carolina, exported $176 billion worth of oil in 2019, accounting for 16.13% of global oil exports. Despite being the largest oil exporter in 2019, it fell to sixth place in 2020 with $42 billion in revenue and 6.57% of total oil exports. The UAE produced 3.78 million barrels per day in 2020, accounting for 4% of global production. Export output, 2,954,000 barrels per day. 10. That's Canada. Canada currently exports more than 3.2 million barrels of oil per day, according to the latest data from World Factbook. This North American country, which is not an OPEC member, exports as much oil as Africa's two largest oil exporters combined. Canada is the country with the third largest oil reserves in the world. 11. And next is Iraq, my friend. Pumping just under 4.8 million barrels per day in 2019, taking fifth place on this list of largest oil-producing countries. It is a founding member of OPEC. Despite being home to vast hydrocarbon resources, the development of the country's oil infrastructure has been hampered in recent years by economic sanctions, military conflict and political upheaval, harming the country's ability to generate national income from exports. Iraq also faces the challenge of relying too heavily on oil revenues, which accounted for about 91% of government revenue in 2018. The majority of the country's oil production takes place on giant oil fields in the south of the country, including the Romanian and Garafa mines, although the Kirkuk mine is an important production area in the north of the country. Iraq was the world's second largest oil exporter in 2016 but ranked fifth in 2020, with revenues of $45.2 billion and exporting 7.06% of total oil exports that year. This is the second largest producer in OPEC after Saudi Arabia. Iraq has the fifth largest oil reserves in the world, but according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, most of the reserves have been exploited or are under development. Export output, 4,260,000 barrels per day. In total, the analysis of the top 11 countries in the world in terms of oil exports shows the great influence of oil on the global economy. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Russia and the United States continue to maintain a leading position in this industry, while emerging countries such as Brazil and Malaysia also began to contribute significantly to the international oil market. However, the problem of energy diversification and transitioning to renewable energy sources is posing a big challenge for these countries. To ensure future sustainability, investing in clean energy sources and developing new technologies is essential. If you find the video useful, please share with more people and subscribe to the channel. Like and have any questions, please leave a comment below. Thank you for your interest in following. Hello and see you in the next video.